Welcome to the Niche Podcast, your weekly rundown of the biotech, clinical research, and applied science industries. I'm your host, Dr. Noah Goodson. This week, we take a Thanksgiving break from the news cycle to bring you a special interview with a COVID survivor and healthcare worker, Trenton Barrick. He shares an inside perspective on the healthcare industry, as well as his personal experience being hospitalized with COVID-19. I've known Trenton for over 8 years. He's a fascinating and talented guy. He works full-time as a neuromusic therapist, using rhythm and melody to retrain body and brain function in his patients. He's recorded and released singles, started his own business, runs a nonprofit, all while in school obtaining a master's degree. Trenton has also participated in a bodybuilding contest, lived in a van full-time, and he once went backpacking near Crested Butte, Colorado, right after he got back from Machu Picchu. My point? Trenton is a fascinating guy. He also does not fit the profiles for the supposed at-risk COVID population. Despite his health and youth, COVID struck hard. Listen as he shares how COVID has reshaped the healthcare work environment, the strain on patients and workers alike, and his personal experience fighting for his life. Trenton, thanks so much for taking time to sit down with me today and being willing to share your experience. And of course, there are now many Americans who have directly or indirectly been impacted by COVID-19. But I felt that it was important for people to hear the diversity and the range of experiences and how yours is weaved into that tapestry. And so I want to start but before we dig into you kind of experiencing COVID-19 and what that's been like, I want to talk a little bit about kind of your broader experience working in allied health. So you're a multi-talented guy. You've worked as a music therapist for years, 10 years, I think. And so give me a picture of before COVID-19 started. What's Trenton's work life like? What are you doing day to day? And what's your work like in healthcare at that time?
For sure. My work life looked like a 40-hour job, using music to meet people where they're at, but also because I work specifically at a rehabilitation hospital, using music to help retrain an injured brain in the area of speech and language, motor, and cognition. And so we'll use the elements of music, such as melody, tempo, rhythm, to help reestablish normalized patterns, such as gait patterns, walking in 2-4 compared to if they're walking with the walker 3-4, if that makes sense. Walker left right, walker left right. A normalized gait pattern would be 1-2, 1-2, right? And so it's reestablishing those normalized patterns in order to get to a more functional independence. And that's the ultimate goal of rehabilitative work, is to use your tools, whether that be through a PT or an OT, a speech therapist, a music therapist. We're all working as a team to get the patient back to where they want to go, and we're helping them to identify what independence looks like to them. And so I just get to be part of the team, and that for me in music looks like individual sessions, one-on-one sessions. That looks like co-treating with the neuropsychologist, the physical therapist, the occupational therapist, or it looks like me creating support groups. And so something I'm passionate about is working with a population with aphasia, and I created an Aphasia Choir.
So I'm just going to summarize here. So before COVID-19, you're working in allied health, similar to what someone might imagine for a physical therapist or an occupational therapist. You're working with patients who may be in an inpatient or outpatient setting, and you're having individual sessions with them. You're going in and you're doing you're identifying their specific needs the same way an occupational or a physical therapist would. You're setting their goals, and then you're utilizing music, whether it's through rhythm, whether it's through old songs, songs they know, to meet those goals. And so that's your kind of your 40 hours a week in allied health. You're just a normal person in the giant healthcare sector of America, right?
You got it.
How did that start pivoting? Because of course when we think about, I think for lay people like myself, when we think about healthcare, and you think about COVID-19, you think of doctors and really nurses. Those are kind of the people we think of when we think of healthcare and the healthcare industry, but it's so much larger than that. How did your experience working I think it's safe to call you an allied health worker. How did your experience change starting in March, and what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. You hit the nail on the head there. A lot of the narrative that was coming up, we were focusing on specifically the ICUs, really, when it comes to the narrative of COVID. We were focusing on the ER. We were focusing on people having to go on ventilators and going on oxygen. And you were just hearing these stories of nurses and doctors being overwhelmed trying to save lives, and then nurses getting it, doctors, dying. And those were essentially deemed at first as frontline workers. But I think as the narrative has expanded and we've gotten a little bit better of a picture of what COVID is, then our understanding of who frontline workers are has drastically expanded, right? When I first heard of COVID, even myself, I was thinking, well, I'm not on the front lines, but I'm in line. But now I would say I'm a frontline worker for sure.
Wow.
And so at the beginning of this, just in my own situation, something that, was just a beautiful thing happening is that there would be all these, discounts and free things that all these businesses would be giving. Some people could easily take advantage of that system, but someone like me as a music therapist that's not well known, already I'm having to advocate for music therapy to be an established, profession in these places.
Right.
I am mostly funded through donations, or through a grant. And so in my situation specifically, whatever's kind of left over in the pot, because I work in a nonprofit, that's what funds me. So I'm a direct expense to the hospital. And so in my situation,
so then do people just start saying, okay, well, they start saying, what can we cut, or what's non-essential? And especially music therapy, I know some people even working in research for that, they're working very, very hard to educate the industry on the science behind this, and that this is really effective therapy, that's really important, transformative for people's lives in recovery. Obviously for a hospital, they're looking and they're saying, who can we cut? Well, the music therapy, that's non-essential and that costs us money.
Absolutely.
To get rid of it.
Yeah. And it's because a lot of hospitals were losing out on money because they had to stop non-elective surgeries. And so every hospital had to go into basically crisis mode, where they had to focus on, cutting costs, but also looking at, do we furlough our employees? Do we have enough in the reserves to be able to sustain a position, even though there's no real income right now? And so you did, have this kind of, feeling of, oh gosh, am I going to have a job? Am I going to be like so many Americans who lost their job? You really don't know, even though you knew the potential of music to really help. Especially as these positive cases were coming in, you knew the potential of music to really help in those places, and you would have to kind of prove based on the research what you would be able to do safely for yourself and for others. But then, they are also looking at PPE, right? They're looking at how many masks that they're allotted, how many gloves. Now we're experiencing a glove shortage, across the country. It's just wild, the waves that we're going through. And so that's another factor in thinking about costs, is just supplies, and who really is essential. Like what do they really need? Do they need a nurse? Do they need a doctor? Do they need a PCA? But maybe some of the unsung heroes that they need is environmental workers. They need the people who are cleaning rooms to be able to go in and do their jobs. And to me, they are the unsung heroes of this whole predicament. And without them, we would all have COVID. We would all be in such a terrible situation. And so I really hope in the future more light gets shed on these people who have just given their hearts and their lives and really sacrificed their lives, having to don and duff night and day, go into these rooms that have been, soiled and used and just really their own, and just festering with this virus, for weeks on end, and they're doing their due diligence. They're, cleaning up to code. They're going home to their families. They're putting their families at risk, just by going into work.
So you're talking about, yeah, I mean, when we talk about environmental workers, obviously anybody who works in a hospital really knows who these people are. But if you've never been in that environment before, I mean, these are the folks who are sort of, I think for sake of a better word, these are the bottom of the totem pole in terms of salary, compensation, respect. I mean, they're basically unseen. They're the people who come in after you've had surgery. They come and sterilize the room. I mean, and nurses do some of this too, nurse aides, but most hospitals have a staff of environmental workers who are sterilizing this. And of course, in a case like this, they're not getting, by and large, they're not getting emergency pay. They're not getting bonuses. I mean, these are people who are living most of them are going to be hourly workers. Some of them are a lot of them are contracts. So they're not even necessarily given the benefits of a normal hospital worker, and they're putting their lives at risk. Just as much as who we should respect, absolutely, the nurses and the doctors. And so, that's huge. And I think it's so important to highlight that what we think of as essential workers, these are actually complex ecosystems. And there are key players that maybe aren't seen, I'm thinking of my ecosystems background. We call them charismatic megafauna, like the white shark or that's like the surgeon, right? They're like, everyone knows who that is when they get sick, but there's keystone individuals, players who are critical to the ecosystem functioning well. And as they get sick with COVID, especially when we see surges right now, I mean, that's why you have people saying, well, we're short on staff. It's not necessarily that we're short on doctors. It's that we're short on everything that makes a healthcare system work.
A lot of this that's happened, it's burned out a lot of people. A lot of people who, were hailed and honored as heroes, and they got, a little bit of strength, a little bit of wind. Now I think that wind has died out a little bit, and the morale of many places, especially that we're still seeing rising numbers. I think we feel less like heroes and more like sitting ducks.
Right.
And it's
and that makes a lot of sense, right? So if you feel like I'm out here risking my life every day, and if you're, and I think so many of these people, they're going home to families and maybe even their caregiver. I'm thinking of they're a caregiver for an at-risk family member and stuff, and so they're not just putting themselves but others at risk, and to feel like, okay, but there's a whole swath of people out there who are kind of treating this like it's not that important, and maybe that they feel that wearing a mask infringes on their personal freedoms or whatever, I can imagine that making you feel sort of vulnerable and forgotten.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it can be triggering. And, where we are, and many hospitals are, we're restricting visitors and family members to be with their patients. And a lot of healthcare, it's a two-sided coin, because a lot of healthcare workers right now are, relieved at the fact that they don't have to deal with extra people and excess people. But for instance, for me, who's had COVID and was isolated for a month, I know the value of seeing family members, and I know the value of that as it relates to my own mental health. And so even talking to a patient yesterday who was so frustrated that, and I think it was 3 months, she didn't have COVID, but still being hospitalized, but because of COVID, she couldn't see her own family members. And I took her outside, first time that she's been outside in 3 months, and she was just so relieved to feel human, and we got a chance just to talk through our frustrations of this isolation and really being out of control, and that's what a lot of that's where the sadness comes, is that the people, like, I know my mom, when I got this, she wanted to do anything to be there with me, but I told her, listen, you can't. Before I got COVID, I was taking patients down to a room called the solarium, where there would be these large windows that they would be able to look out through. And that's where we invited family members to come. We still are. We invite family members, and they have to talk through phones, but at least they get to see each other through the glass.
Wow.
And a lot of times that,
that's like a prison experience. I mean, in my mind, I'm seeing it like, it's almost like a prison experience of, I can look through the glass, but we can't touch each other. We can't interact. I mean, it's better than nothing, but it also, I think there's such a connection of just human touch and intimacy and closeness and sharing air that, of course, is dangerous with a virus, but is so critical to human well-being.
Absolutely. And you see the mental trauma that's coming, and it's almost reestablishing these familiar norms. You know, I remember having a husband to a wife. I was with the patient. She was the wife, and she was sitting there on the phone with her husband. They were looking at each other, just, you know, a couple of inches apart, but, you know, they couldn't touch because of the glass. And his eyes just were so red with tears because all he could say was, "I should be in there with you. I should be in there with you."
Wow.
And you want that for them. You want that to, you know, you want the walls just to break. You want the glass to break. You want to be able to help reunite. And it's just not possible yet. And that's what's so tragic, you know?
Yeah. Did your roles and expectations on you change when COVID hit? Have you started doing other things besides what you would normally do in terms of providing music therapy for people? And what's that looked like?
For a while, we had to cut outpatient because, you know, we weren't allowed to see patients, you know, just coming in. We're in a better position. And so that's been opened back up and reestablished. But for me, I got a chance to work with patients who were actively recovering from COVID. For me, that looked like going to assist the OTs or the PTs when we would go into specifically a patient room. I have one patient who was a little older than me and was on a ventilator in a medically induced coma for about 3 weeks. He was a singer, and I immediately went in because I knew he would appreciate music, and I gave him a harmonica in bed. And I said, I just want to test your respiratory capacity. I just want to see your endurance. Let me just measure it to get a baseline to see where we're at. And this man, who was a singer for 2,000 plus people, you know, church every Sunday, could only breathe into that harmonica for 2 seconds. And he was winded. He could barely get a sentence, you know. And so I would be alongside the OT, and while the OT would stretch and just move his legs back and forth, side to side in the bed, I would be providing music just to help establish some type of distraction from the discomfort and the fatigue, but also to help engage, you know, breathing on the beat, you know, just to help establish some type of like normalcy when it comes to a rhythm. Because oftentimes, what do you do when you're short of breath?
You just kind of get like panicky.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes very fast breathing. And so pulling that back and just to help engage the diaphragm again, slow, deep breaths, diaphragmatic breaths, just to relax the body while an external force is helping you move where either you have fatigued, you're having atrophy, or you're having pain and you just can't do it yourself. And once again, you're out of control. What can that, you know, spark, especially if you're short of breath, anxiety. And so all of these different multifaceted, you know, neurological and biological things are compounding. And just, you know, and to one person, and as a healthcare worker, you're just doing everything you can for a moment of comfort and for a moment of breakthrough for them, even if that looks like sitting up from the bed, and they haven't done that in weeks. If that looks like, you know, sitting on the side of the bed, which this young man, that took about a week for him just to be able to sit up out of bed. And personally, having gone through COVID, I'm so thankful that I went, and I've had about 5 years of experience working in rehab, because oftentimes I would have to use what we teach our patients with spinal cord injuries. I would have to use those exact same procedures just to get myself up out of bed and to transfer myself from the bed into the bathroom. I would have to do that often for multiple days because I had no strength whatsoever. I was so fatigued. And eventually, when I was able to text again, because I had developed pink eye, I couldn't even look at the screen. My eyes were so irritated. It's a not as popular symptom, but I would text the PTs that would have, that taught me these techniques, and I'm just like, you helped me so much more than you even know.
I think I just want to review. I mean, so much of what you described is these myriad of what I would call like micro tragedies. And maybe that's what a national crisis is. It's 10,000, it's 100,000, it's a million, it's 100 million micro tragedies. People who've lost their jobs, lifestyle's been disrupted, isolation, but also older people not being able to talk to each other across glass, a singer from a church not being able to even breathe, even barely make noise out of a harmonica, not being able to sit up. You're watching this happen. Your whole life is physically pivoted from where you were before, and then you start having symptoms in October 7th. What was that experience like for you? And what were you feeling when you started feeling bad? What started running through your head, and how did that go?
Yeah, absolutely. So the morning of October 7th, I woke up with a pain in my lower back, my spine, the base of my spine, and it was almost like a body ache, and it wrapped around my legs towards my quads into my knees. It was a really weird feeling that it would start there, and I knew that I had not done any type of external force or movement to where I might have a slipped disc or anything like that, but I went into work thinking that, man, my body must be stressed or fatigued because there's so much going on, and it must have really just, my body, I'm an empath, so maybe I'm just taking on a lot. I'm going around doing my job throughout the day, but I'm noticing I'm just getting a lot more tired as the day is going on. The next morning, I woke up after just a terrible night of where that body pain was isolated in those specific places. It now just encompassed my whole body. There was a fever. I started getting night sweats and chills. We were supposed to have a party that night as a goodbye party, ironically, for a nurse friend who was on these COVID testing sites. And so she was being moved to a new location in Texas. And I contacted my roommate at the time, and I'm like, I have to listen to my body on this one. I'm going to be bleaching the house down. I'm going to be wiping everything down. I'm going to have to miss the party.
Wow.
I really feel like I need to isolate myself. And that's been my game plan. We had a good conversation months earlier, about, if I get it, what do you want me to do? If you get it, what do you want me to do? Every family needs to have that conversation. Every family needs to have those game plans in place. And so that was my game plan from day one. So I knew immediately what to do. I went to a hotel. I got a room. I stayed the night. Symptoms got worse. I called out the next morning and immediately got tested. I came back to the hotel after getting tested, and I rebooked for the weekend. Luckily, they upgraded me to a suite for free. And I was like, this is amazing, because I had a full-size fridge. I had a stove. I really had everything I needed to be able to kind of like wait this thing out just in case I had it. Right. And sure enough, on Saturday, October 9th, I had it. Or Friday, October 9th. And then on Saturday, October 10th, I got the positive at 5 a.m. And then at that point, I had been wrestling with a low-grade fever. But after that point, it's just like it took off. It went from 0 to 60. I got hit by a bus, it felt like. I felt like I got married to my bed. I was so lethargic. But yet I was unable to sleep because it had given me this insomnia, and I would only get a chance to sleep for maybe 1 to 2 hours max. And then as soon as I would wake up, I'm just in cold sweat, and my sheets are drenched. And so thank God I'm at a hotel, because I can just call the front desk and just be like, hey, I need new sheets. I need new towels. And I did talk to the manager. They did know that I got tested. So sweet, so accommodating. And their protocol was for me just to stay isolated in the room. I couldn't leave, and I couldn't have visitors, which as it should be. I just didn't think that I would be at that hotel for that long, because I was at that hotel for about 2.5 weeks, fighting symptoms.
Isolated by yourself.
By myself. Yeah, absolutely.
You're like you're like Grubhubbing every meal when you can't even eat. Like
Instacarting because
nice.
or Whole Foods, through Amazon, because my body couldn't tolerate deviations from specific foods, and the foods I could eat were gluten-free toast, honey, a banana in the morning. I would just pound the fluids because that's what all my nurse friends told me to do, just as many fluids as you can. And then I could only eat chicken and dumpling soup. For whatever reason, that's all I could eat.
That was it.
Almost 2 weeks. That was what it was. And so I was talking to my mom. Here's what's funny. I was talking to my mom. I was like, I don't know why this is all I can eat. And she goes, well, and this Kentucky lady, well, baby, when I went through my chemo, when I was going through my breast cancer, that's all I could eat was chicken and dumpling soup. And I was like, really? She was like, yeah. I was like, what are the odds? She's like, well, you came from me, didn't you? I was like, well, I guess I did. Yeah, that makes sense. So it was a really unique bonding, experience. That's just what would happen. And my family was good to me, man. My coworkers were good to me. My coworkers raised all the money I would need to be able to pay for my hotel fees. Which got
that's incredible.
Which got 4 digits. It got up into the thousands for sure, because immediately after the hotel, just to save money, I had to go into an Airbnb situation, just to wait this thing out, because I was still having it eventually moved to my chest, right? And I was being treated for pneumonia at that point, and so I was still having the off and on fevers. I was still having the cough, still having the shortness of breath upon exertion, still having just the fatigue and difficulty sleeping. And thank God for Tylenol PM, because when I finally got a chance to sleep more than 4 hours, I cried. It was just amazing. It was amazing. Wow. And throughout, that process where the symptoms really proved to be their worst, my whole definition of success, and I'm very success oriented, as you can kind of tell, I'm a very outgoing, very busy guy. I stay involved, I'm going to school, I got a small business, I'm working full time. My definition of success changed completely, because the day that all I could do was pull myself, using these techniques to pull myself from the bed, walk myself to the bathtub. I would lay in the bathtub for an hour, get up, and then go right back to bed. That was success for me. And I've never been prouder of myself for fighting for myself, but for doing what I needed to do, and not worrying about anyone that I'm trying to impress, or not worrying about trying to hustle for the dollar, like not worrying about trying to meet anyone's expectations other than myself, and just really being kind to myself in that place, because at one point the fever spiked so much, over 103, that I did get delirious. And I remember that night, which later a nurse told me I should have went to the ER at that point, but you don't know what you don't know.
You're delirious and you're by yourself, but
exactly.
You're like, not a good decision-making point.
Not at all. And so I just remember not knowing where I was at that point. But in my heart, like, I remember internally this voice, almost commanding my body, my name is Trenton. My name is Trenton. And I would just repeat that, and that was me fighting. And I would just go ham internally on COVID, because it's a war zone in my body. And that's why my body stays so fatigued, because my body's immune system was just overridden, and it was fighting so hard on my behalf that's why I was fighting. And I just remember just screaming at COVID, and forgive my language, but I'm going to kick your ass. I'm going to kick your ass, like, I'm not going to let you beat me. And you have to have that warrior type spirit going into this. You can't be scared anymore. It was either that, or you just let it beat you. What do you do? And it's very interesting having people tell me 6 weeks later, when I'm finally back in civilization, and I get to, I was cleared for work by my doctor, still not fully recovering, still dealing with long haulers, still dealing with, mental issue, word finding issues, memory issues, still dealing with chronic fatigue, that we're still seeing in long haulers. People call me a survivor of COVID, and I realized, like, the narrative that I always painted were the people who were on ventilators, who were, receiving oxygen. Those were the severe cases.
Right.
Those were the real survivors. But now that I know, that I was misled in thinking what is severe, what is mild. I was misled there just because, yes, I went to the ER after about 4 weeks because my heart was doing something absolutely crazy at this one point, and I didn't know if I would make it. That's once again, that's part of long haulers. My heart went into tachycardia when I woke up, and within 5 minutes it went into bradycardia. It was in the 40s, and so I had to rush to the hospital just to see what was going on. And of course, they couldn't find out anything. But
so let me just pause here for a second, because I want to go through. You just shared a lot that's so both intimate and powerful, and I hope encouraging for people. But I think that there's also there's this narrative out there that this is sort of like the flu. And so, that narrative started early on. And to be honest, probably in early March, I was probably like, well, is it really different than the flu? I was there. But obviously, as the stories unfolded, that's not really the case at all. And, I just want the audience to be oriented. You're a guy who did a bodybuilding contest a couple years ago, very fit, extremely healthy, no comorbidities, 32 years old, like just extremely healthy place, and eats very healthy too. So there's no I just want people to be oriented that this isn't just like for kind of old sick people. And I would love if you would just even compare. I'm sure you've had the flu before. How is, and you've talked through symptoms you've already had, shortness of breath, extremely high fevers, delusionalness, tachycardia, bradycardia. And then I want to talk a little bit about some of what you've called long haul symptoms. So first, could you talk a little bit about how this is definitely not the flu?
Absolutely. I think especially there's symptoms that are close to the flu, very, very similar to the flu in some cases, but COVID does what it wants in you when it wants, and it looks so different in everyone that it's hard to really generalize what COVID is. It's so complicated and it's so complex, and there's so much about it that we still don't understand, that I would never call it the flu. Just to give you an example, in previous years at the hospital, if you didn't want to get your flu shot, all you had to do was wear a mask, a paper thin mask, one of these general surgeon masks, and then that you were considered protected. Now we know that those things, those paper thin, the cloth mask, they don't prevent, they mitigate, right? They mitigate you from being able to get like a certain amount of COVID. But in order to be able to not get COVID at all is to at least have a 95 at least. And so that's kind of a basic understanding of how harsh this virus can be in your life. Just
right, like how virulent, how easily it can spread.
100%, yeah.
Right.
And so the symptoms, I feel like, are different, and the proof is in the long haulers. The proof is in the long haulers, because it extends farther than just the symptoms that you typically hear about in that do appear to be flu-like, and those symptoms.
So talk to me and talk to me a little bit. I mean, I want our guest to know. It's really amazing that Trenton sat down with us, because he has continued to experience symptoms, and specifically, I think you've told me, brain fog and memory issues. And so, and also just exhaustion. And so I really appreciate you sitting down, but I also want the listener to know that, this is not Trenton at 100% at all. And so can you talk to me a little bit about like, what is a long hauler and what are kind of some of the symptoms people are having?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a long hauler are people who experience these post-viral symptoms that can last for weeks or months, even after perhaps you retested negative. And I think at the beginning of this, because we still didn't understand, a lot of doctors were apt to kind of writing off long haulers, or writing off their patients who were saying, I don't feel like me anymore. Mm-hmm. And it does manifest differently in people. And so, we're seeing from the research that people can deal with, and at least in my case, how it presents in me, chronic fatigue, memory issues, loss of word finding, just being able to, to find the write words today. I kept on saying the word potato when I was telling the dog where to go, and then I meant patio, and I didn't recognize it until my roommate was like, "Why are you saying potato?" And I'm like, "Oh shoot," you run into these walls. And
So
then
you're having like a senior moment is what it feels like.
it really does, and you get
Right.
even more compassion for your patients. And then, of course, attention issues. I get so distracted so easily. I think week 3 is when I started to try to watch movies, and it took me over 8 hours to watch the first Harry Potter movie because I couldn't process it. I ended up having to contact my professors at school because I was a straight 100, every assignment kid going through these grad school courses. And I had to get incompletes for the semester because I couldn't retain anything. I couldn't retain any information. I couldn't even attend to the readings. It would take me an hour to 2 hours to write one email at the beginning. Now it's a little better, but I still do, struggle on occasion. And you don't feel like yourself. I could be mid conversation with you, and then my I just don't remember what we talked about, or if I had shared with you a specific thing that I knew I needed to share, and I'll ask you again, did I do this? But apart from that, just the mental health component, right? So some research is also coming out that 1 in 5 people will be diagnosed with a mental disorder within 90 days. And it's heightened, especially the probability is heightened if you already have an existing mental disorder. And those things could be, anxiety. It could be PTSD. It could be depression. It could be more insomnia.
Right.
It could even be early onset dementia. And so, for me, those things actually didn't really manifest until I was finally released out of isolation and I got a chance to go home and finally be around my family. But if anyone listening, if I can compare it to anything, it would be very similar to what it is when you go through chemo treatments and you're having, that chronic fatigue, that brain fog, just feeling slow. You're still able to work. It's just you're having to deal with you're different. Your body is fighting, and it's like you're super stressed without being stressed, if you know what I mean.
So Trenton, thank you so much for coming on to the Niche Podcast. Thank you for taking time to share your story with us. I think I just want to close. You work on so many interesting projects. As we've talked about, very creative guy, lived in a van before COVID, created albums, music therapist in grad school, full-time job. You've done all these things, but I want to talk specifically about an aphasia choir you've started. Aphasia is the difficulty of some people to communicate, or it can happen because of stroke or other diseases, for people to put their thoughts into words. And you created a choir, or you're part of creating a choir for aphasia. Can you just tell us a little bit about that project and where people could find out more? Because I think it's a really cool project you're working on. And I just want people to have a reference to support some of the work that you're doing.
Our initiative is just to open the doors for anybody living with aphasia or who's a caregiver of those who have aphasia to be able to meet together online through a virtual community that's safe, that understands, that makes provision for any severity of aphasia to exist and just to be honored. And we do that through music. We do that through singing. And so we spent months rehearsing and reaching out to anyone and everyone we could around the world. We ended up getting 55 families from 5 continents.
Wow.
Together to create a virtual choir. And that was the culmination of the community. That was the project that we worked towards. All those months that we spent recording, we would have meetups. We would do karaoke, just for fun. We would have group practices. We would meet new friends in Australia and Argentina and the UK. And it was just this beautiful opportunity that just kind of came together, and it was a lot of work, but it really felt that there was a grace on it. And that we were meeting a true need. And so yesterday we released the video. We did a world premiere, and we released to the public the song that we felt was most appropriate, which was "What a Wonderful World." And so all these families came together singing "What a Wonderful World," especially in this time of chaos and tribulation, just to help remind people that even with the difficulties that each person is experiencing, there is still beauty, there's still reason to hope, and there's still the power of resiliency. And that's the message that these people wanted to spread, even with their aphasia, even how difficult, even how much it's changed their life. And you can see there's a parallel to that with COVID, right?
Yeah.
Even as much as it's changed your life, sometimes for the worse, sometimes for the better, there is still beauty in the world, and it's still wonderful. And to find those moments, those things that make you see it. And so they released the song, they released the video, and I'm so proud of them. I'm really so proud of them. They worked so hard, and we're having a new project starting up in 2021 in January. And so anyone with aphasia, we're just inviting them out. If they would like, they can go to either singaphasia.com or my website, nmtworks.com, WORKS. And they can figure out what it is to be part of the International Aphasia Choir and see if it would fit their lifestyle and see if our community would meet their needs. But we would love to have them, and we want to invite anyone and everyone to be part of it.
Yeah, you're right. Thanks so much for sharing. I think, there's an appropriateness in this time of great isolation, having a community who has so deeply felt and experienced isolation, being locked in your mind, not being able to communicate, feeling distanced from people, that they're able to come together and sing out a message of hope. And I think that's something for all of us to take note of and follow in suit, to make a way to connect and to communicate and to hear each other's voices in this time. So thank you so much, Trenton, for sharing with us, and to everyone out there who's taken time to listen. Thank you so much for listening to this story and of someone who's gone through COVID-19 and what their experience has been like. And we wish you all a wonderful and safe holiday season. Thanks for joining me on the Niche Podcast, your weekly summary of the top news in biotech, clinical trials, and applied science industries. We'll be back with our regular programming next week. You can find us on your favorite podcast app. Like, comment, subscribe, and most of all, share with your friends. If you like what you hear, please rate and review. It really helps us. Once again, I'm Dr. Noah Goodson, and I'll see you next week.